Chicago, 1925. A man walks into a restaurant. The waiters stand up straight. The manager comes rushing over. People at nearby tables whisper to each other, "This man is not a president, not a celebrity, not a war hero, a bootlegger from Brooklyn, and worth more than most American companies." His name is Al Capone, and what he built wasn't just a criminal empire, it was an economics lesson that the U.S. government unknowingly financed. This is the story of how a single policy decision turned billionaires, ordinary criminals, into billionaires, and what it still means for your money today. January 17, 1920, a freezing cold winter morning in America. At midnight, the 18th Amendment came fully into force. The production, sale, and transportation of alcohol banned. Just like that, politicians celebrated church groups through parties. Newspapers ran headlines about a new moral dawn for America, but in the warehouses stretching along the Chicago River, in the kitchens of Italian immigrant families in Brooklyn, in the back rooms of bars, nobody was celebrating, they were doing the math. Because here's the thing, when you ban a product that tens of millions of people drink every single day, they don't just stop, they don't wake up the next morning, shrug, and switch to lemonade. They look for another way, and whoever finds that other way gets very, very rich. The U.S. government had unknowingly done something extraordinary. It had created one of the most profitable markets in American history and handed it, gift wrap, to whoever had the nerve to take it. Al Capone was born in 1899 in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, New York. His family had come from Naples with almost nothing. Growing up, money was tight, opportunities were limited, and the fastest way up was usually the most dangerous one. While still a teenager, Capone had started running with street gangs. The facial scars that earned him the nickname Scarface didn't come from a dramatic shootout. They came from a bar fight that broke out after he insulted a woman. He was 18 years old. He wasn't a genius in the academic sense. He dropped out of school at 14, but he had something rarer, the ability to read people's situations, an opportunity when Prohibition came into force. Capone was 20 years old, already connected to organized crime in New York, and about to meet someone who would change his life. Johnny Torrio, a mob boss operating out of Chicago. Torrio saw what was coming. Chicago was wide open. The city's mayor was a notorious corrupt. The police were badly paid and easy to buy. And in a city of over 2 million people, the demand for alcohol wasn't going anywhere. He needed someone young, hungry, and smart. He called Capone. When Capone arrived in Chicago in the early 1920s, he didn't find a criminal empire waiting for him. He built one himself. And the way he built it explains why it worked. Most bootleggers of that era were small-time. Buy some liquor, sell it out the back of a truck, pocket the cash. Simple, risky, and completely dependent on someone else's supply chain. Capone thought differently. Selling the product didn't appeal to him. He wanted to own the product from the moment it was made to the moment it touched someone's lips. So he acquired breweries, not through legitimate business deals, through intimidation, negotiation, and outright takeovers. He controlled distilleries. He managed import routes, bringing whiskey and gin from Canada and Europe, actually drinkable products, unlike the dangerous homemade rotgut that was blinding people across the country. Then he built the distribution network, hundreds of underground bars across Chicago, hidden behind fake storefronts, accessible through secret doors, back alleys, and coded knocks. These weren't dingy holes in the wall. Some were glamorous, live jazz dancing women in silk dresses, men in sharp suits, the kind of places people actually wanted to be, and every single one of them paid Capone for the privilege of staying open. The numbers are almost hard to believe. His organization was pulling in an estimated $100 million a year in 1920s money. That's roughly $15 billion in today's dollars. To put that in perspective, the entire U.S. federal budget in 1925 was around $3 billion. Capone's organization was generating half the federal budget illegally in a single city. Now let's get to where things get really interesting, because Capone's success wasn't just about hustle or connections. It was about a fundamental law of economics that the government had broken. Before Prohibition, alcohol was cheap. A glass of beer cost a few cents. Whiskey was affordable for the working class. It was a commodity, low margin, high volume, nothing special. The moment it became illegal, everything changed. Think about what illegality actually does to the price of a product. Every person who touches it, the brewer, the driver, the middleman, the bar owner, is taking on enormous personal risk, prison time, violence from rivals, raids by law enforcement. That risk has a price tag, and it gets added to the cost of every single bottle. But here's the key, none of those risks could hold back the demand. People still wanted to drink. In fact, the forbidden nature of it made it even more appealing to some. Underground bars were packed every night. The cocktail culture that emerged from Prohibition, mixed drinks designed to disguise the taste of low-quality bootleg liquor, became the foundation of modern bartending. Economists call this inelastic demand. It means no matter how much the price goes up, people keep buying alcohol, cigarettes, certain medicines. These are products where price sensitivity doesn't work the way it does for, say, a new television. Capone was sitting on top of the most inelastic market in the country, and he had a near monopoly on supply. That's not just luck. That's a perfect economic position, but Capone's real genius, and this is what set him apart from every small-time criminal of the era was understanding that money alone wasn't enough. You need systems. The money had to be laundered. Cash flowing in from hundreds of illegal operations was an obvious red flag. So Capone invested in legitimate businesses, restaurants, laundromats, nightclubs that provided a believable explanation for his wealth. The term money laundering is said to derive partly from this era, from the use of laundromats as cash-washing fronts. The operation had to be protected. Capone spent lavishly on bribes. Police officers were on his payroll. Judges received envelopes. City council members turned a blind eye. Even some federal agents took bribes at the height of his power. It's estimated that Capone had more than half of Chicago's police force on his payroll. In some capacity, this wasn't corruption that happened by accident. It was corruption as a business expense, calculated, systematic, and essential to operations. And rivals had to be managed. This is where the violence came in, not as Capone's first move, but as a last resort when negotiation failed. The most infamous example came on February 14, 1929. Valentine's Day. 7 members of a rival gang, Bugs Moran's North Side crew, were lined up against a garage wall on North Clark Street and shot by men dressed as police officers. The massacre shocked everyone. It made headlines around the world, but what people forget is this. By that point, Capone had been running Chicago's underworld for years, with relatively little open violence. The Valentine's Day massacre wasn't a show of strength, it was a sign that something had started to slip, that the carefully managed balance was coming apart, and it marked the beginning of the end. By 1930, Capone was the most famous criminal in America. Time magazine put him on its cover. He employed thousands of people. He ran soup kitchens during the Depression, real ones that fed hundreds of thousands of people, partly out of some sense of community obligation, and partly as pure public relations. But fame is a burden when your business depends on staying invisible. The federal government had been trying to build a case against Capone for years. Every time they got close on bootlegging charges, the evidence vanished. Witnesses changed their stories. Cases collapsed. His legal insulation was too strong. So they tried something different. A small IRS investigation team led by a meticulous agent named Frank Wilson spent years going through financial records, tracking cash flows, and building an almost invisible paper trail. They weren't trying to prove he was a criminal. They already knew that they were trying to prove he had income he never declared in a country where even illegal income is technically taxable. That was enough. In 1931, Al Capone was convicted on 5 counts of income tax evasion. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison and fined $50,000. The most powerful criminal in American history was brought down not by a shootout, not by a rival gang, not by some dramatic act of justice, by an accountant. Years later, in 1933, Prohibition was repealed. The 21st Amendment undid the 18th legal alcohol. Return prices dropped overnight. The underground market, worth billions of dollars, evaporated, replaced by a taxable, regulated industry. The government that had accidentally created the most profitable illegal market in history now dismantled it on purpose and kept all the tax revenue. Now you might be thinking, great story, but what does a dead gangster from the 1920s have to do with today? Everything. The mechanics of what happened during Prohibition aren't historical curiosities. They are live, active forces running through today's economy. Think about cannabis. For decades, marijuana was one of the largest underground markets in the world. Billions of dollars, untaxed and unregulated, flowing through criminal networks. Law enforcement spent enormous resources trying to suppress it. It barely made a dent. Now, as legalization spreads across the U.S. and around the world, watch what happens. The money doesn't disappear, it moves. It shifts from street dealers and cartels into publicly traded companies, tax revenues, and regulated storefronts. The demand was always there. The laws just determined who got paid. Or look at crypto. For years, Bitcoin and its cousins operated in regulatory gray zones. Early adopters made fortunes. Exchanges ran with minimal oversight. Margins were extraordinary, precisely because the space was uncharted. As regulation tightens, as institutions move in, as governments figure out how to tax and control it, the wild profits of the early days are shrinking. The market is maturing. It's starting to look more and more like an ordinary industry, just like alcohol after 1933. This pattern shows up everywhere. Wherever governments create restrictions through sanctions, export controls, licensing requirements, environmental regulations, they create gaps between demand and legal supply. And those gaps always attract capital. The lesson isn't that you need to break the law. The lesson is that the shape of legal and illegal markets tells you where money is moving and why. Al Capone died in 1947, his health broken after years in prison and the advanced syphilis that had been eating at his brain since his 20s. He died in a villa in Miami, surrounded by family, but a shadow of the man who had once terrified a nation. His empire was long gone. The market that had made him had vanished. The city that feared him had moved on, but the economic forces that built him still running, still reshaping industries, still making some people rich and leaving others behind. Capone read his environment better than almost anyone alive. He saw the gap between law and demand and walked straight into it. He just wasn't fast enough to see the next shift coming. That's the real lesson, not the crime, not the violence, not even the money. It's this: the world is constantly changing around you. Policies shift, markets move. The gap that makes someone rich today becomes tomorrow's regulated industry. The question is, can you read the environment, or are you going to be the last one to find out it changed? If this gave you a new perspective on history and money, subscribe. There's more where this came from.